Hey, welcome back y'all. I'm Amr, and this is the S2 engine, my custom leverless layout. Now, apologies before I begin if you hear any background noise. That's just one of the perks of living in an apartment, so please do your best to ignore it. I originally wanted to make this video about like a year ago, way before even Street Fighter 6 came out, to kind of explain my little manifesto about why you should be using these alternative layouts, adding thumb buttons to your leverless controller and all that. But life had other plans for me, and instead of having a big, nicely edited showcase, this is kind of what we're gonna get. I figure something is better than nothing, and late is better than never. So what is this? This is my custom leverless layout. You might have also heard them as all button controllers or hitbox controllers. Basically, joystick turns into 4 buttons, and you keep the regular arcade layout on the other side. I personally started on a keyboard, and then I eventually moved to hitbox, and then eventually when I got to hitbox I was like, hey, this is great for fighting games, but what if this layout was for all kinds of games, including retro games and 3D games? So, you know, I think we're kind of getting to the point where we're reinventing keyboards, but with slightly more ergonomically tuned for video games themselves. When I originally started this, maybe like 5 years ago or something like that, there were no other options for hitbox controllers. There was hitbox, and there was making your own hitbox. So there weren't very many options for leverless controllers or anything like that, let alone alternative layouts for leverless controllers. Now we've had a huge boom of them thanks to open source firmware like GP2040CE, which has basically dropped a huge chunk of the cost of building a controller that is compatible with consoles. So we're seeing all kinds of options on the market, and this kind of feels like a little too late, but let me explain my reasoning for why I built this layout, why I like this layout particularly, and why I think it is one of the best options, at least for me. So basically, you have the hitbox layout right here, and instead of having a pinky column, cut off the pinky column, stick it next to this jump button, so you can still hit the jump button with both fingers, but you get, you know, a little additional extra buttons here. Now I like this instead of like sticking a button up here, or you know, like here, here, or somewhere over there. Like all kinds of different leverless layouts to do, because your fingers rest here or here, depends on where you're playing. Instead of having your pinky kind of move between 2 buttons here and try to hold those while you're pressing over here, you know, you give the thumb something to do. They're kind of lonely most of the time on normal controllers, and you get a big button over here, so you don't need to be as precise for hitting those buttons. And at the same time, you can hold this button while still operating 3 fingers over here. And instead of having to like reach down or across or whatever, you just kind of pull your thumb in to hit these buttons, which is generally when you're playing on something like this, it's much easier to curl your fingers in. It's much more natural than to stretch them out. You know, it puts less strain on there. So I figure since your thumbs are you know, opposed to your other fingers, it's much easier for them to curl in, and you get this cute little Mickey Mouse layout. So that's my reasoning for that. We'll go over some other options that are just, you know, pre-built and pre-made. Obviously I made this custom myself. I did the art. I sent this off to get printed in get cut in a custom layout. But I'll go over some of the other options that are out there and some of the ones that I actually like. But for now, let me just drop us into a game and kind of demonstrate what it looks like. So here we are in Street Fighter 6. Let's jump into the game. Let me show you. Yeah, here's the movement. Jump, jump. Over here we got light, medium, heavy punch, light, medium, heavy kick. Now, I like, you can use the thumb buttons for this, but I like to have drive impact over here. So my hand just comes down to react. And I have drive parry over here, so I can, oops, easily drive rush like that. I mean, you might prefer having it over here on this side, so you can go. That might also be easier. Just kind of depends on what your preference is. I just kind of ended up here for some reason. As you saw, throws on this side, and over here I just have usually I have like a button macro of some sort. I don't have anything on it at this very moment. But yeah, that's my layout. That makes it pretty easy to, you know, perform everything that I need to perform. Let's actually reset that positioning. And I think the advantage in fighting games is pretty obvious. You know, having thumb buttons over here makes it just so much easier to react to DI, to access your parry button, where you normally have to, like, you know, move your finger. You either, like, some people do like the pinch where they like hit their hit two buttons with their finger and their thumb, or what I usually do is hit it with like the meat of my finger. Yeah, it's just really inconsistent for me. Or you know, you can turn your fingers like that. This is just keeps it in like a much more like a home row position where I don't really need to hit a bunch of different moves. In other fighting games like Tekken, I just use, it goes left punch, right punch, and then both punches, and then kicks, both kicks, and then, you know, heat and rage art over here. I would say this is actually much more useful in like 3D games, because you can move in 3D like this with 8-way. That's what I do in Soul Calibur or like a Tekken. And then you can hold down like one of these buttons to be your block button, right? So that makes it much easier to like hit a block button and on another attack at the same time and things like that. In Mortal Kombat, I never found a good arcade layout. I'm not going to show you Mortal Kombat. Normally I would show you the Mortal Kombat, but you know, that game's like 150 gigabytes and I don't have enough space. But I think it's pretty easy to imagine, you know, in Mortal Kombat you usually use the trigger for block, so instead you use the thumb for block, you know. Pretty obvious use case for that, I think. And those are the matches there. But let's, you know, I said this is for more than just fighting games, so let's show it off in more than just fighting games. So here is Cookie Cutter. This is a very combat-focused Metroidvania, and so what I've done is I have switched my controls by pressing the function button and hitting one of the directionals to change to one of 4 different controller profiles. I'm using GP2040 CE, which is an open source controller firmware, and one of the options that it has is it lets you switch button mappings on the fly. So in PlayStation terms, this is square, cross, circle, triangle, and then L1 R1, L2 R2, and then the stick clicks, which don't really do anything in here. But another advantage of that is, let's go into the game itself, and let's get out of here. You have modifiers, so instead of this having a second up button, I can press it, and while this usually works as left stick for movement, when I'm pressing it, it turns into the D-pad so that I can heal myself. Let's go back to those enemies and see if we can... Nope, that's not going to reach. And this, it just, you know, if you've ever played any very combat-focused games, you just know that they feel great on an arcade stick. And if you haven't done, if you haven't used an arcade stick for this style of game, I definitely recommend it. Let's switch our weapons real quick. Basically anything that like does not heavily rely on analog controls can be great with like an arcade stick or a leverless style layout. Yeah, I think you can kind of already see the appeal for something like this, and you know, while it's not as relaxed or suited to chilling on the couch as just using a controller, it really gives you the satisfaction of both ripping your enemies to shreds and getting those nice mechanical feedback of an arcade controller, which is one of the reasons I built this thing. Well, I could play this forever, but let's move on to something else. Okay, so for our next game, we're going to be using Ninja Gaiden Sigma 2, but before that, I want to show off a little feature of this guy. There are two headphone jacks here. Now, these are not headphone jacks for sound, but rather they carry the signal for buttons and switches, something you'd see on like the PlayStation access controller, the Xbox accessibility controller. And essentially, we're going to take a switch. In this case, it's a foot pedal. And we're going to plug that in there. And I'm going to be using that as an extra modifier. You can also use an extra button. So if you wanted to say have drive impact or some kind of super button that you need to react with really fast on your foot, you can do that. I will not be using my feet. One, because it would be really hard to stick my foot up on top of this table. And two, because there are perverts everywhere. Let's show this off with Ninja Gaiden, because I wanted to show it off in like a 3D environment, you know, like a character action game. And one of the problems with character action games is this is not enough buttons to control the camera. But hold down this thing and look at that. The D-pad turns into a... Ooh, shit. The D-pad turns into a right stick. Now, that only works in this game because there is a button to just recenter behind you, and you're not generally going to be looking around. This is not going to work as well on something like first-person shooter or something where you constantly change the camera. But in stuff like this where it's pretty limited the amount of times you need to use the camera like that. It's pretty good. Let's see, is the guy dead? Yes. And nice. So now you get, you know, the cool precision of arcade style controls. And you know, like fighting games, character action games are full of doing cool combos and pulling off technical moves. So like the added precision of these inputs really helps. Oh. Nice. Okay, cool. Yep, there they are. Now, a lot of 3D games like this, they actually only use 8-way controls. Like, they do have analog input, but most of the time you're just gonna, that's just for like walking versus running, and most of the time you will be running, obviously. But if you ever go into an action game and slowly move the stick around, you might see that like they'll start walking in one direction, and it's not until you get to like the 45-degree modifier that they'll change direction. So that's where it works best and stuff like this. But I think you kind of get the idea over here. You can also, again, use the D-pad modifier to access your inventory. So, you know, all buttons are accounted for, which I think is pretty sweet. I've definitely been playing this game a lot with a bunch of different arcade controllers, and it just feels good no matter what layout you're using. You know, as long as you're not trying to use one of the, you know, original hitbox layouts. Okay, so for our last game, we are going to be looking at Pocky and Rocky Reshrined. Now, I said I originally built this layout for retro games, and one of those things that I wanted to play with was like shmups and action games on Super Nintendo. So I think coming back to a remake of a Super Nintendo game is kind of poetic in that way. Not to be dramatic. Now, this is not a very complicated game. There's 3 buttons. There's an attack. I guess 4 buttons. There's an attack. There's a melee attack that you can also use to reflect projectiles. And there is a dodge. Now, that's just like a fast movement. It's not like an iframe dodge. So don't get super excited and try to use that to dodge through bullets or anything like that. And then there is your traditional shmup bomb. And, you know, this has strictly 8-way controls, so it's really good in that respect. You can tap them together to face a specific direction really quickly with no travel. Same as you get on the D-pad, but with, you know, a little bit more precision since you're not just using your thumb. Again, it's just playing arcade-style games is fun with an arcade-style controller. And that's kind of the D-pad of using like a hybrid keyboard and hitbox layout. Now I can still use the up button over here, but I'm not really using anything. If you want, you can switch it to, again, you can switch that into make it its own button. Maybe set that on bomb or something like that. You know, set it for a different button in rhythm games or something. You know, there's a lot of rhythm games with novel control schemes that won't, that you might want to play with like arcade style buttons that don't quite transfer. And I can definitely see using something like this for that. Now this game just, it looks so good and it feels really good and it's fun to play, but it's also really hard, and I'm sure sooner or later I'm gonna make a fool of myself. Definitely check this game out. Even you don't need any, like I say, you don't need any special controllers. If you got like a 4-button controller, heck, you could get away with playing this on it. But yeah, that's kind of what I wanted to show off in terms of this controller. But obviously, you would have to build this yourself. Now, there's plenty of places now you can get a custom layout, but since I started this project, like I said, there has become a lot more options for alternative layouts on leverless. And I picked up a few, of course I did. So let me show you. So if you don't want to make your own custom layout, what are the off-the-shelf alternatives? I'm going to show you a couple of them, starting with ones that I feel are just missing 1 or 2 things that make it feel as good as the one I made. That just kind of missing a feature that I'm looking for. And then I'm going to get to one that I really like. Now, the first one I'm going to show you is this kind of mix box style controller. They're basically just miniature keyboards for fighting games, complete with keyboard switches. I've heavily customized this one, but I believe this is the Haute42 Cosmox, whatever, B16, I think. This is usually actually a 8-button layout, but if you look here, I took out one of the switches so I can make it a little closer to my personal layout with like the big pinky buttons, you know. And these are okay. One of the things I don't like about them is that they tend to be a little cramped and small, and these buttons are just a lot smaller. They feel pretty good because 1, they use keyboard switches, and 2, you could swap out those keyboard switches for whatever you want. So I got some like Jade Blossoms, I think, and they feel great. Love them. And you can change the feel of the keycaps and everything. and on, you know, you can switch them out for different size keycaps if you want like a little bit more, a little bit larger surface to hit. The problem I have with this is by not having another button right here in the middle, if you want to have, for fighting games, if you want to hit the jump button with both of your thumbs, you're essentially making both of these your jump button. So you kind of either give up the advantage of the hitbox style layout where you can hit the jump button with both thumbs, or you give up two keys and then you kind of lose that trigger functionality. So on something like this, I end up kind of just jumping over here, which makes it a little bit harder for like 360 motions and kind of some of the shortcuts that you might use for a leverless style layout. But otherwise, I think they do a pretty good job of letting you use them for a variety of different styles of games. Like for the 3D games like Ninja Gaiden and stuff like that, where I need like a D-pad modifier, I can just make this into the D-pad modifier and use these for like left trigger, right trigger, and you kind of get similar results. So the next one I want to show is now this is one of my favorites that I've worked on. This is the Mavercade Keebrawler 04 MX, and similarly it uses keyboard switches, but these are, you know, designed to kind of mimic an arcade controller switches, and there's standard keycaps over here. Obviously I heavily customized this. I did the art, and I had some custom keycaps made by Hungry Hustlers on Etsy, who did a pretty good job walking with me and then getting revisions through. It was a process. Anyway, this is, you know, almost the same as the one I built, and I talked to the creator of Mavercade as I was kind of coming up with this controller and showing it to them, and I showed it to them, and coincidentally they were just kind of working on something similar at the same time. So, you know, I think there was just something in the air where people were coming up. The things that I like about this are this pill button is so satisfied to hit. I don't want to pull them off just because they're a pain to put back on, but these are stabilized. So they got keyboard stabilizers on them, so anywhere you hit them, it feels good, and it feels so good to push them. Like I cannot emphasize that enough. As well as if you're using them as like modifiers, you have basically almost the length of your entire pinky on there, right? It's fantastic. Big problem, no up button on this side. You know, it just kind of rules out the 3D gaming unless you want to like map this to like an up button. But you know, I just kind of wish that people wouldn't be afraid of kind of doing that. I've seen a lot of controllers with similar, you know, they're designed for fighting games first, and I think by adding another up button, not only could you get like 2D and 3D retro games and action games and stuff like that, but you could also get like, it would make it really good for stuff like, you know, Project Diva, where you can kind of like have a dual WASD setup to do the moves there. Importantly, there is no button in the middle, but it is a split layout, and essentially these two buttons here, or these two buttons here, doesn't matter, however you want to map them, those will turn into your space button. So you get a split layout with a little more space between your fingers, but you can still hit the jump button with both of your fingers, and you still have the ability to map these as your triggers or whatever. Again, if it just had that WASD in there, then you could get, you know, you would be able to switch to a layout that just like lets you use all these buttons as like extra buttons for different kinds of games. That'd be sick. Now the the next layout I want to show is what they call a rectangle or box layout. This is actually for Super Smash Brothers, but you know, it works on a bunch of different consoles, so there's nothing stopping you from using it for a fighting game. Similar to fighting games, I actually map these over here to the jump here. Over here, you've got like a modifier for like for like drive impacts or whatever. And then same over here. That would be, I would use these for the pinky buttons. And then over here, I can rest my thumb here and use those as kind of the thumb modifiers. On this side, because of the way this is placed, what I do is actually I leave the jump buttons up here. Like I set these as jump, and then the fingers that I swipe when I swipe in, I use these as the triggers. Now by default, this is the left stick. This over here is the right stick, and then there's like an attack. There's the A button over here. Smash controllers are weird. I don't got time to get into it, but suffice it to say, you can do a lot with this. And like you can even control the camera through this because it has so many damn buttons, and you can get literally left stick, right stick, and then you can get modifiers for D-pad, and you can play full 3D controls over here, except this why? Actually, on default box layout, for some reason they want you to jump with your pinky, press up with your pinky, so I think that's completely unintuitive for Smash. And they do make box style controllers for Smash that have a WASD style up button, and I would really like to get my hands on one of those, because I think that would really be like the perfect leverless for both Smash and 3D and 2D games and rhythm games and all that kind of stuff. And this thing's thin. It feels so good. It has metal plate. Oh, by the way, this is a Super Slab. If I didn't say that, this is a Super Slab by Prong Studios. It feels really good in your hands. Actually, it responds so fast. And I've been learning to play Smash on this a little bit. I don't think it's going to become my main controller, but that's because I have some other projects in the works for that. But if you do want something with more buttons, this is the most buttons you can get. Okay. Now you know how I said if that split layout just had a WASD style up button, it would be perfect. Hey, look at that, look at that. Oh, so beautiful. I love it. So, same deal, not my favorite over here. No pinky buttons, and you really know that I don't really want to use these too much, but most importantly, the cross for movement, the double jump buttons. This one's even a little bit bigger, hitbox style, so that's sick. And then the space for trigger buttons. So on fighting games, I use this like a regular hitbox, and then I got those triggers over there, just like on my own personal controller. But when I'm not playing fighting games, I get the flexibility to switch these up. So these can become the triggers, and then the stick click, or the triggers and the shoulder buttons, and then have these for modifiers. You can have this D-pad modifier and then right stick modifier, and you still have access to all the rest of the buttons. Great layout. This is, by the way, the Duelpad Zen that just came out. I'll be doing a review of this soon, but suffice it to say, as far as off-the-shelf layouts, I definitely prefer this to a lot of what the other ones are. But yeah, that's like your overview about the states of leverless controllers, and kind of like a look at my reasoning for why I built mine the way it is, but also just like there's so many cool leverless options out there, and like go look for it. Like go look at them if you're like interested in fighting games. or just arcade style controllers, like you have so many options right now, and it's a really exciting time for both building and just picking up stuff. I definitely, a lot of these controllers are also pretty cheap, so like I definitely can encourage you to look for some. Like if you got questions, drop them in the comments. Let me know how you like my layout. Let me know how you like any of these other layouts, and then let me know what your perfect layout looks like, and then maybe I can tell you, hey, it already exists. But that's all for now. This video's run pretty long, so, you know, until next time, peace.